Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Meenakshi Krishnan, a partner within Deloitte's healthcare practice based in the Washington, D.C. area. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all to our session today and to the series on effective EPR implementations. We kicked off the series earlier this year in February. We started with a high-level overview on what to expect as your organization undertakes an EPR journey. And subsequently from there, we have chosen a topic each month to do a deeper dive. So clinical design, change management, technical aspects such as testing and integration. And these webinars are all available to you as recordings if any of these topics are of interest to you. Our focus today is on sustainability and optimization. So you have gone live with your EPR and you're now in a stable mode. So what's next? The EPR journey certainly does not end there, but it simply moves on to the next phase, which is optimization. And to talk about that on the session today, I am joined by three of my colleagues. And let me give you a little background on myself, and then I will ask my colleagues to do the same. So I am a pharmacist by training and have been in the organizational transformation implementation space for about 17 years now. And I bring experiences from the clinical, the revenue cycle, and the ancillary areas. The clients that I have served have varied in size, from the complexity of large academic medical centers to smaller community hospitals, and I've mostly assisted them with their end-to-end implementations with vendors such as Epic or Cerner, and in some cases, specialized ancillary systems such as SoftLab. And lately, now that the majority of the hospital systems, at least here in the United States, have modernized their EHR platforms, the clients that we serve now are focused more on the optimization and the managed services aspects. So whether it's needing assistance in specific areas such as, say, testing or build for an additional module or an upgrade or outsourcing of all of their IT functions. And while the majority of my clients have been based in the United States, I have had the opportunity to partner with our global member firms and serve clients in Australia, in Europe, and in the Middle East. So with that, I will hand it to Donna. Donna?
Hi, I'm Donna Zeller, and my background started as a critical care nurse. I then went into health information technology, where I've been helping organizations similar to Meenakshi for about the past 20 years now implement their EPRs, both Cerner and Epic, and have really started to focus on the optimization services as they begin their migration to more advanced capabilities within their EPRs.
Frank, would you like to take it from there?
You're next. Yep. Hi, I'm Frank Roach, and I also am based in the US. I work very closely with everybody you see here on this slide. And as Meenakshi and Donna, I've got a little over 20 years of experience in the healthcare provider space, primarily the first part of my career working on implementing the large package solutions like Cerner and Epic. And for the last 8 to 10 years, I've spent most of my time focused on how to support clients in a production environment with managed services, application managed services, et cetera. And so that'll be the perspective I'm providing today, and I'm happy to join you all. Stacy?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Stacy Tucker. I'm joining you from Atlanta, Georgia this afternoon. I'm a technology strategist and architect and work with healthcare organizations to really just help solve their most complex technology problems, whether it be operating model, governance, or overall technology strategy. By way of background, I'm a bio and nuclear chemist and have served in leadership roles in organizations as a CIO and CTO. Look forward to talking with you later today about some of the implications of application and infrastructure rationalization.
Excellent. Thank you, Stacy. All right. So in today's session, what we plan to cover are really three main topics. So starting with an overview on optimization that Donna will cover. And from there, we'll take it to managed services, and that Frank will speak to. And Stacy will wrap us up here with a look at some of the technology consideration. And we will leave some time for questions at the end, but if you have a question as someone is speaking, please do write them in the chat, and we'll monitor the chat and address those questions at the end. So now, moving on to the next slide, before we jump into the actual topics here, I just want to spend a minute reiterating something that we have discussed previously, and I'm sure you're all aware of, and that is the importance of governance. Governance and guiding principles are something that you set up, right up front at the very beginning of an implementation, as it is critical for you to have effective decision making. And the role played by these governance structures really evolves over the course of the implementation journey. But what you will discover is that it is important to keep a form of governance in place post-implementation as well, as you start making decisions around your optimization priorities or changes to your operating model, your staffing model post-go live. And the guiding principles that you set up front as well are not likely going to change. They're still going to influence the decisions that you make as an organization. So, and the last thing I will say is your key stakeholders that helped you drive that implementation journey are going to play a critical role moving forward as well, as you need their support in order to do your optimization priorities in the right way and move forward on your implementation journey, or your EPR journey, I should say. So with that, I will give it to Donna to take it away on the optimization overview.
Thank you. And so as Meenakshi said, we are going to be talking about sustainment and optimization. And our previous webinars really focused on all of the key activities and phasing leading up to the implementation. Today, we're going to shift gears a bit and talk about what are the traditional phases that we see our clients go through as they evolve in their EPR maturity. And as part of that, for each phase, we'll talk about the time frame when we generally see it occur, the criteria that they use to move from one phase to another, and also the focus areas where they put most of their effort during that specific phase. Having criteria is really important to objectively move from one phase to the next. After you go live, it's not uncommon to have questions come forward around, are we stable yet? Are we ready to optimize? When will we be ready to optimize? And so having very objective criteria to help you address those questions is really an important factor. So the first phase is implementation and remediation. Remediation is that period of time where you're making sure that you're technically stable, that your end users are able to work within the system, and that you have fixed all of the critical defects. So those are really the key criteria that we see organizations use to move from remediation into stabilization. Stabilization generally occurs anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks post go live and can last up to 6 months, even though most of our clients have a period of time, I'd say about 3 to 4 months to stabilize within the system. And the intent of stabilization is to fix all of the major defects, have the end users really completing their workflows as designed. So a lot of reinforcement around the correct workflow to use within the system. But most importantly, getting business and clinical operations back to baseline or enhanced performance is the primary focus of stabilization. Optimization occurs after you're considered stable and lasts indefinitely. Primary focuses within optimization include enhancing user efficiency, continuing to build out the tools to support your clinical and business programs, and then also patient experience, enhancing that experience and continuing to adopt and modify areas within the patient portal to improve that experience. The last phase, strategic, is one that we added just based on how we see our clients evolving. And so the strategic phase is really where they're using the data captured within the EPR to conduct advanced analytics, enhance business and clinical performance, but then also implement more advanced capabilities on top of their EPR that are integrated and use that EPR data. An example would be capabilities around telehealth that the vendor may not have, where you want to strengthen your telehealth program. So those are the major phases that we see organizations go through as they evolve. If we can go to the next slide. Much has been written about how organizations struggle at times to realize the full value of their EPR investment. And so some of the constraints and major challenges that we see them encounter, the first is resource and capacity constraints. Keeping the lights on and sustaining the system can be resource intensive at times. And so they may not have the capacity to optimize at the level they would like to. The next one, and this actually came forward from our clients, was continuous implementation cycles, where you're bringing on new hospitals as you create integrated care systems. And in the US, we have cycles of mergers and acquisitions where you need to bring on a new hospital and implement your EPR within that organization. That takes away from your ability to optimize. And the last one is struggling at times to decipher what's the root cause of a significant issue. People tend to go to the technology right away, but generally we find that they're a combination of people, process, and technology. And so convening interdisciplinary groups to really look at the root causes of those issues and address training issues, making process modifications or system modifications is probably the best way to tackle some of those major issues. So moving on, optimization doesn't happen organically, and it really requires careful and deliberate planning that starts with the initial implementation phase, where you're looking at your resource model, not only to implement the system, but to sustain the system. And it's modified over time. Some of the guiding principles or lessons we've learned from clients that we've worked with around optimization, probably one of the most important ones is that there must be an operationally driven process with clear criteria to establish your priorities. And so to Meenakshi's earlier point, keeping some of those governance structures in place to establish those operational priorities is very important. There's a need to find the balance between sustaining the system and doing some optimization. If you simply are only able to sustain it, end users quickly become frustrated when you're not able to fulfill what they consider to be a pretty simple enhancement request. And so finding that balance. Expanding the capabilities of the help desk and providing them with education about the EPR so they can provide the basic level support and address some of the simpler support questions and direct those that are more complex to the appropriate analysts. The super user network remains a critical component of ongoing upgrades and rollouts. And so maintaining that super user network for ongoing communications and reinforcement of correct workflows is a critical piece that we learned as a lesson. The governance structure will consolidate. And so streamlining it down to key advisory groups along with an executive team to provide that operational input. And some departmental focused work groups stay in place, such as A&E, perioperative, pharmacy, etc. The implementation team will right size, and some of the analysts will go back to operations. Those that are retained are cross-trained many times. They can provide a broader scope of support. Training communication capabilities need to remain in place, and testing continues to play a critical role in the ongoing sustainment, fixes of defects, and upgrades. I'm going to move on to the next slide. So the types of requests that come in through the support desk really fall into a couple different buckets. The first one are incidents, and those are defects. They're categorized based on criticality, as you do from the point of go live, and they remain a top priority for the analyst team to resolve. The next are requests, and requests fall into different buckets. Requests are smaller items and generally take about less than 40 hours to complete the work. Types of requests that come forward are for system access and service, which is I need to map a new printer. I need to install a new label printer on the unit. Those are service requests. And both access and service requests fall under service level agreements that are established with the IT department. Enhancement requests are things that don't exist in the system today, but that the end users are requesting to enhance the ability to complete their work. Things like, I need a new order set, or I need a new scheduling template, are enhancement requests. Those, along with major projects, go through a prioritization process. The difference between a request and a project is the level of effort to complete the work. So both projects and enhancement requests generally go through some form of prioritization. I'm going to go on to the next slide. So what is the prioritization process? It starts with having the enhancement requests and the project requests go through advisory groups, relevant advisory groups, where either clinical and business establish their priorities, and then they're brought forward to an executive team to establish priorities for the organization. The criteria that are used, and these are samples that we see similar to what's used within our clients. The first component is value, and value is driven by your operational priorities. So there's a value score along with a level of effort score. And in this instance, the level of effort was a combination of hours to complete the work and the number of teams that would be impacted by the project. So that gives you your prioritization score. And then there generally is a grid that determines what capabilities or what priorities are you able to take on in any given point in time based upon the capacity that you have available to optimize. And those are placed on a grid. If we can move on, one of the things that I don't want to underestimate is what it takes to sustain a system. And sustainment, another term that we use, is simply keeping the lights on. And so there's a great deal of work that is incorporated under keeping the lights on. The first bucket is this application support, where you have requests coming in. They need to be categorized, they need to be redirected to the appropriate group, and they need to be tracked through to closure. So that whole basic level application support is an important body of work that's maintained. The other one is maintenance, keeping your system up to date. So third-party database vendors like First Data Bank, you need to take periodic updates of the database, making changes to the order catalog, updating your order sets based upon those changes, or your medication profiles. All of those are routine application maintenance that needs to occur on a periodic basis. And then finally, the vendors require that you take upgrades, and they can be simple upgrades or they can be major version upgrades, which are version upgrades are similar in many ways to a mini implementation, where you need to establish the scope of the upgrade, you need to complete all of the build, test, train, and communicate. So all three of those really are quite a large body of work that has to occur continuously to sustain and maintain your system. Which brings us to the point of capacity management. So you have a finite group of resources to complete all of this work. And so where we see organizations, essentially you need to look at your recurring requirements, which is what we just talked about. All of those support, upgrades, maintenance are recurring requirements. There's intermittent requirements that come forward. Having to take on a new hospital and implement the EPR within a new hospital that has recently joined your organization. Regulatory changes that take precedence over optimization. And then finally, your optimization priorities. So balancing resources across all three of those can be extremely difficult. As you recall, in our first slide, we talked about resource capacity and resource constraints, often challenge organizations in their ability to optimize. So there's this continuous tension. And so what organizations will do at times is bring on temporary resources. Or Frank is also going to talk about the path that some of our clients are taking, where they bring on managed services to help manage that ongoing tension around the need to optimize, but also maintaining and keeping the lights on within the system. So Frank?
Excellent. Thanks, Donna. Yes, and so building on what Donna said, and did a very nice job of laying out all of the considerations and quite honestly, some of the challenges that organizations face as they move from an implementation standpoint to a go live and on into a production environment. A lot of times, clients are looking for partners that can help provide support within that framework. So a lot of what we see, internally and externally, organizations are looking and are faced with challenges in terms of how are they going to get the right skill set, or how are they going to maintain the right skill set. Oftentimes we've seen, especially in some of our global clients, where there's still a a bolus of implementation work occurring, we'll see a specific client will go live, and take Epic as an example. And they spend all the time getting, a bunch of resources trained and certified, only to find out that, the next organization, in the neighboring, province or town or country is doing the same, and needs those same resources. So there becomes a very competitive market for resources. There's cost implications and resource implications, coming on the back end of COVID, and we're still not quite out of that. Has created tremendous, strains on hospital organizations, and then internally. There's always a struggle to find the right level of quality, to find the right level of service quality, being able to do things in a cost-effective manner, while achieving very strategic goals. So, oftentimes organizations, as Donna mentioned, will look for partners to support in this, to bring the efficiency, to bring experiences, to bring the capacity flexibility to bear, so that organizations you can manage these expensive platforms in a very cost-effective and high-quality manner. So if we go to the next slide, oftentimes organizations will organize themselves in ways that can address bits or all of the application management requirements in a production environment. So the way Deloitte looks at it, and the way that we interact with our clients is, right at the center, at the heart of what we do, in the middle of this slide, are the application managed services that we talk about, that address a lot of the requirements and needs in a production environment that Donna talked about. The light fix, the break fix, keeping the lights on in terms of ongoing support, maintenance, just the routine activities that need to occur within the environment on a regular basis. That, oftentimes, does it make sense to have, a clinically trained, highly strategic type resource at the keyboard, just applying database updates on a regular basis, just to keep the application up, updates, optimizations, and consolidations. Moving to the left-hand side, oftentimes there's a lot of activities that happen around the core EPR application itself. A lot of our clients, for example, look to outside help to manage the integration functions. So all of the interfaces and all of the interoperability, between our state and local agencies that require information. The technical piece, how do you manage the underpinnings of the application itself, whether it's the infrastructure, the data centers, the core, the cloud, all of those different types of things. That's another area where, as you're evaluating somebody, if you decide to go into, a partnership with somebody to help manage in a managed services type of arrangement, these are types of activities that oftentimes clients look for as well. And then moving further to the right of this slide, quite often what we see in organizations that maybe even quite mature in their management of their applications post-implementation, they'll start to see a backlog of requests for specific areas, or take testing as an example. There's constantly things that are changing and happening within the environment, which creates a constant need for testing and validation and regression, and making sure that nothing's going to be introduced into the environment that's going to cause harm. And then, as we talked about capacity previously, in terms of how you manage that, oftentimes reporting and just the need for this specific physician groups or physician-specific clinical groups, requiring more and more data and more analytics out of a system. So these are services that could be carved off and easily supported by an outside organization, for lower cost and for higher quality. So talking about the what, and then you look at the how, right? A good organization, a good partnership organization, if you're engaging somebody as a third party, will have all sorts of different ways that they can engage. And so from one end of the spectrum, whether it's just a need for highly skilled resources in very specific areas, if there's gaps that are hard to fill based on local resourcing or very niche skills. Organizations can look to fill those gaps in kind of a staff aug model. One of the more interesting models that our clients talk to us about, and we find that they're very interested in, is what we call our foundry model. And if you think of a foundry in terms of a traditional, manufacturing, that type of scenario, right, where raw material essentially comes in one end, and you've got a capability within the foundry, within the factory, to stamp out a finished product, and that finished product comes out the other end. That's the concept, and that can be applied to support services as well. A lot of our clients, for example, I talked about integration services on the previous slide. This is a perfect, model to help a client, manage integration type of activities. It gives us the ability, but with forecasting demand, 30 to 60 to 90 days out, to see what activities are going to be happening within the organization, so that if we're the partner, we can ramp up to meet the oncoming capacity and then ramp back down again as the demand starts to wane over time. So clients then essentially are purchasing services as needed to meet the requirements that are happening within their environment. As we move further to the right of the spectrum, co-sourced is just another model that says, okay, our clients want to maintain these very specific portions within their environment, but then there's other activities, like I talked about before. Maybe it's taking just the break fix tickets, or maybe it's taking the standard maintenance and routine update items, and say, well, Deloitte or whoever, why don't you guys take that and manage that within a very specific set of service level agreements or service level objectives, and then we'll manage the core strategic parts of the application. And then finally, at the other end of the spectrum is more of a full managed services. And this is where an organization will come in and essentially say, we'll take responsibility, for the platform itself. You'll obviously still have, as a client, oversight and leadership and strategic direction. Your clinical informatics people will still set the direction in terms of what they want from the clinical informatics standpoint. But when it comes to hands-on keyboard and how you'll do this, we want you to kind of, take that headache away from us. And we're going to hold you accountable, to specific service level agreements, service level objectives, those types of things. And so then, you're a real partner with us and helping us to do all of the things that Donna had talked about earlier. So moving on from that, then we talk about how we support our clients. And for Deloitte, we found, the best way to do this is by having, a global offering, right? And this gives us the ability to have what we call global delivery centers, regional delivery centers, and local delivery centers. Through our global delivery centers, for us and how we support our clients in the US, we've got two key global delivery centers within India, in Bangalore and Hyderabad. Regionally, we have one that's based in our central time zone in the US, in Mexico. But then you'll see on here, we've got also local delivery centers across the globe, where we've got the ability to, stand up a group of resources, a group of skilled resources, close to or in the same, city or province as our existing clients. That doesn't require us to have to be, in their facilities, taking up their space, but, working within the same local regions as them. And so as you're evaluating, if you're evaluating organizations that can support you, the ability to kind of have that flexibility across the globe is something that's important. One of the benefits of this that our clients find is by having delivery capability essentially on the other end of the clock that we have in the US, that gives us then the ability to work more on a 24-hour basis instead of just during business hours. There's a ton of activities, for example, that lend themselves to being best performed when there's a lot of people out of the system. In overnight hours, when you don't have a ton of clinicians or end users utilizing the system, those are great periods of time to do maintenance activities. And then also, from an optimization or an upgrade status, being able to develop requirements, in one time zone and hand those requirements off to a build team, at the back end of your working day, so that they can do the build overnight and then hand it back to the onshore team, during their daylight hours to do the validation, dramatically increases the turnaround time for organizations to be able to get stuff done. So again, just putting this out there as perspective is, a lot of organizations will set up this way. It gives you, good access to, very cost-effective labor pools, and it gives you, great access to a more strategic way of managing your application. And I believe I'm going to hand it over now to Stacy to talk a little bit about more of the technical and other considerations as we go through this.
Absolutely. And thank you, Frank. As we look at, a lot of the technology considerations that go into, an EPR implementation and even the optimization afterwards, our people and teams still form the foundation for all sustaining all of our successes. So really building upon the models that, Frank has described here, I wanted to share some perspective first around an operating model. And although organization charts may vary from enterprise to enterprise, our core capabilities of a technology operating model can always be found in one form or the other. And, an operating model is simply that framework for the organization to make sure we align ourselves always with the overall business strategy and the business goals. It really just keeps us accountable to our stakeholders and, how we deliver value. As you look on the screen here, there's 7 common domains that you see depicted. And each area will evolve in maturity as the underlying application and infrastructure footprints change during planning for the EPR, during EPR implementation, and post-implementation as we talk about optimization today. You'll notice within the hierarchy here that technology partnering forms the top of this model. And it really reiterates the most critical, role and critical nature of maintaining engagement with our business and clinical stakeholders. The ability to consistently deliver value and provide guidance to our business users, and even the core prioritization and governance that Donna highlighted earlier remain at the top of this operating model. But underlying that and at the core of this is sort of our commitment to technology architecture, service orchestration, service delivery, and providing meaningful data. And I really highlight these areas because these are the core areas where the majority of our teams and resources reside. Our teams are largely involved in driving our application and infrastructure footprints. So it's really, critical for us to continue to ensure the growth and maturity of these resources as we look at, what happens after EPR implementation. During the implementation or, in the time post, you may be looking at, are we appropriately upskilling resources? Are we providing supplemental or complementary resources, as Frank has mentioned? Are we even looking at, alternate sourcing methods? But it really stays at that core of what teams are required to enable us. But, behind, deciding and understanding, what our teams should evolve to, a frequent challenge is, sort of balancing what would our new workloads be? What would our new volumes be? And I find that the excitement and the passion of the EPR and, the new technology and the transformation we bring, we sometimes neglect our initial business cases and rationalizing the previous platforms, or maybe even duplicative platforms. So on the next slide, I wanted to maybe step back and talk about some of the ongoing initiatives and just look back at what got us to today. Because I think it's kind of critical to acknowledge that, our original business case Our original goals that formed the foundation of where we are today, we probably had some benefit mechanisms, TCOs, in areas that we saw, justification, on how we can sustain the EPR in the future. Application and infrastructure rationalization were likely a core part of the business case. And it's, a really common theme in organizations. The senior technology executives that we speak with, no less than 50% believe they have more applications in their portfolio than their business truly needs. So the problem exists, and it's a common foundation to the business case. This slide really just takes a moment and kind of highlights the journey that you started, or you're considering, and kind of reflects, what I see as three major milestones, the quick wins that we're achieving today, the streamlining phase, and then really an achieving phase. These three phases do not happen overnight. The rationalization of the infrastructure is as thoughtful as the time that was spent implementing the EPR, and could be a 2 to 3 year journey. So just to kind of highlight a couple of these, the first phase around the quick wins and replacing redundant applications, this is the most common phase. This is where we quickly get rid of some existing platforms, sunsetting some that are easily being replaced by our existing EPR. This is also where a lot of organizations stop. They have decommissioned the core applications, or maybe even only turned it off. So, a key question there is, did we finish decommissioning? Did we finish decommissioning infrastructure? Did we finish decommissioning networks and licensing? So being very holistic there of how far did we go with our quick win? Because it's easy after those initial decommissionings not to continue on in the journey. But the next phases are where we really achieve the value, and we really help optimize IT. So that next phase of really streamlining IT's cost base is where we go after the next tier of duplicative applications, perhaps your tier 2 or your tier 3, that were not a part of that initial business case, but perhaps you discovered as you were doing planning for EPR. So continuing with the applications that are a little bit harder, that will take more time and more buy-in to decommission. At this phase is also where you can begin optimizing some of your infrastructure. It is possible, as we bring down these applications, that perhaps we bring a data center offline. Perhaps we can reevaluate some consumption-based services and optimize savings, and just renegotiate some of our fees based on changes in utilization. So it's really a good moment to begin taking our business case to that next step. And then the last phase is really that new model for IT. We've got a really streamlined environment at this point. We've optimized for some redundancies, and we're establishing a real vision for the organization, saying these are our core platforms. And to me, that's the key word. IT at that point, we are a real platform provider, and we're an exemplar for the enterprise. We're operating cost efficiently, and we're providing platforms for clinical services or financial services to enable clinicians and staff. So at that point, we really have moved from, an application sprawl to being that partner. Again, that is a journey, and it's not somewhere we achieve, overnight. But before, talking a little bit more, I thought I would step back into the next slide and just take a moment to highlight some of the other components and challenges that may have formed an application or infrastructure rationalization initiative. I find that EHRs, EPRs may be a driving force, and you may be the tipping point that gets the organization to embrace it. But the issues generally existed long before this moment and this initiative. And I highlight some of these areas that have needs because an application and infrastructure rationalization takes the enterprise. It takes buy-in from everyone. And some of these areas I highlight can be partners to help us drive this initiative forward. And some of the areas that, frequently come out, as, strong supporters, highlighted in the green here, are some of our shadow or near IT areas. In the past, they may have been operating, with siloed purchases or operating in siloed support. The new enterprise system may be able to bring them on board and they can take advantage of some of the new benefits. And they can be a champion to help you decommission. Other areas that come into play can be through merger, acquisition, or even divestiture at time of facilities. But we find that those can be good moments to instill our standard architectures and platforms. That's a great moment to not increase the sprawl, but to manage to, our core and best practices. Another challenge that comes up here in the need and sometimes an advocate is that our portfolio is overly complex. It's not unusual for healthcare organizations to be in the high 800s, over 1,000 applications. And as a portfolio gets that complex, at times it can really obfuscate some of the duplications. Through your EPR planning and workflows, you may have helped demonstrate some more integrated approaches and, demystified some of these complexities. At that point, many of our business users are ready to help let go of some of these smaller point solutions and help support our business case. The last one I'll highlight there, it's kind of my favorite one. It's the zombie applications. And that's the ones that we thought were decommissioned, but they're still there. We will have gone through a couple of processes and think we've turned an application off, and maybe it has been decommissioned from a user perspective, but it's still running and taking up server space. It's still taking licenses. It's still taking infrastructures. That's terribly common. And then through this process, decommissioning is ensuring we have turned off the servers. We have decommissioned them. They are out of our data centers. So that really becomes, an interesting area and need to bring those business users on, because do they still have that application for perhaps a once a year report that we just simply didn't know about? On the right-hand side there in blue, and I certainly won't read these all, but, a couple of just challenges that, I look to and, that really help us, at the same time is ensuring we've got strong collaboration and engagement with the business partners. We've got to have their inputs to understand some of the complexities and perhaps the intertwined natures of applications that may have been perhaps homegrown or legacy, from, many years past. So really ensuring that collaboration to help let go of it. Another challenge that we will run into is helping understand details around our application sprawl. One of the key things that really helps prioritize which applications could I turn off first would be around utilization. Seems like a really simple metric to understand, but getting data around how often an application is used, accessed, or run is a lot more challenging than it sounds. And no doubt you've probably run into those instances. So it really is helpful at that point to bring business to the table to understand how frequently are they perhaps using an application as well. But some of those, some of the background on this slide really helps frame, why rationalization is much more than just a continuation of an EPR, but it's a continuation of IT's transformation. On the next slide, I'll walk through a couple of high points as just what some of the key steps are and phases are around an application rationalization. First, I think as the complexity of the slide highlights, rationalization is not achieved overnight and certainly takes quite a bit of a time to achieve. but you've already formed the foundation of it through your EPR. So you're not starting at step one. And as you look at this diagram, there are really just four phases to it highlighted in the various colors here. The green areas are really the preparation. And that's a lot of the very work you've done with your EPR implementation. You've gathered information about the environment. You've gathered information around the applications, licensing, and how they're spread and hopefully how they're used. So most organizations following an implementation are moving into step four. And in those areas there in the dark blue and light blue, we really are looking at analyze and plan and monitoring. And really what this is designing our future state plan. Where are we going? And the most important part of these phases right here is not only the preparation, but it is the absolute communication and engagement with the business, because we need their overall buy-in to finally turn off an application. One of the, the most disappointing moments will be to have spent months preparing for an application to turn off, and in the day before, the week before, there's a one last communication or one last user to engage. So we really highlight here that it is continual engagement and communication plans that make this successful. You will be technically very efficient at these, but engaging with the business continues to be the most critical step here. The lighter blue area there really highlights we want to monitor and we want to recognize that this is an iterative approach. We will decommission applications in waves or groups, and that'll either be done based on a business capability or perhaps based on a functional area. Could be based on a technical architecture, but they will be done in waves. We certainly will approach this in a methodical approach, but that monitor and iterative approach means we're going to learn from what we're doing all the way through, and we will get more efficient and more, engaging with each step. The last phase there, that step 9, is simply the gray, the deliver, the executing, and moving forward. And at that point, you really are moving into your ongoing enterprise governance. It really, at that point, is all the way back to the foundations that Donna laid out at the beginning of the call. We build a strong governance to ensure that we don't allow our application environment and infrastructure environment to return to this. So it really takes us right back there to governance as, our gatekeeper to guide us and, in the future. In the last slide here around rationalization, I thought I would just highlight just a couple of practical lessons learned from the field. In years of doing this, there are always moments you step back and go, that was a key takeaway and something that you want to share and ensure maybe we could do better. And I really group them, in 3 areas for organizations that are looking at decommissioning. And it's really lessons learned around either the preparing, the actual decommissioning, or the wrap up. Under the preparation, I think some of the most common things that, we may overlook and that we've got to, ensure that we do as well as possible are the detailed planning and the governance approach up front. Do we have a complete data set? Have we understood all of the orphaned applications, those zombie applications that could have been hidden out there? Do we have full data sets? Because our entire planning is based upon that. So really having that full information so we're not challenged later. Incompleteness there comes back to haunt us. Under the decommissioning area, and no doubt I think that anyone finishing an EPR probably has a great understanding of and appreciation of, is ensuring that we test and retest our environments and testing the decommissioning of the application. We learn from that if our application perhaps had an undocumented point-to-point interaction. Perhaps there was some legacy interface that just simply, despite all our diligence, was missed. So ensuring that we test the turning off, the moving, to find, is there any legacy or custom codes that may have been tied to us? That extra moment will ensure that we are successful and that our overall decommissioning process doesn't get, a bad reputation, that we are as successful with decommissioning as we are or were with the implementation. The last area I'd highlight, under the wrap up is back to maintaining constant governance and ensuring that, we get feedback from the field so we kind of sustain the optimization, ensuring that, we bring everything back together from the groups, that, whatever governing bodies we use, whether they be clinical advisory groups or perhaps physician or other groups, are they fully engaged in looping any feedback back into governance? So it really is pulling everything back together, as really one of the most critical areas. I guess just to really wrap up in closing here with some of this, the journey through application, infrastructure, simplification is really going to help IT be more nimble and efficient, because as we optimize that portfolio, our teams are really more empowered because we're focusing on the core applications and not, the periphery anymore. And we really do have a more flexible operating model. So we're all working towards that goal of sustaining the EPR and, the efforts we put into it. So it really does bring that transformation to close. So although it can be really technical at times, it really does help with the completeness of our projects. With that, Meenakshi, I'll turn it back over to you for any questions or any closing comments.
Yes, thank you, Stacy. All right, so I don't see any questions in the chat, but I want to take a minute here and just ask if there's anybody who has a question on anything that we've discussed today, or even otherwise on EPR implementations. I think we might be able to take questions in general. So I'll pause there for a minute and see. Anything? Okay, quiet group today. All right, so let's wrap up then. We at Deloitte spend a lot of time thinking about, what's next in terms of healthcare, what advancements there are in technology and health solutions overall. And with that in mind, we have a lot of white papers that have been published. And here's a listing of them. There's links in here, so you'll be able to access these. And should any of these be of interest to you, we'd encourage you to look into these a bit more. So with that, I would say thank you to everyone who joined us today. We do have one last session, and that is focused on interoperability and system integration. And that session is currently scheduled for early part of September. So please keep an eye out for that invite or to register. And we look forward to seeing you again on the next one. Thank you so much.